Hello, I am Mudita, and welcome back to Satisfactory. This is episode 24 of the load balance playthrough, and today I'm going to tackle rubber. I'm going to utilize the heavy oil residue, diluted packaged fuel, recycled plastic, and recycled rubber alternate recipes. These are a great combination of alternate recipes that save on crude oil and drastically increase the amount of rubber produced. I want to make sure I have enough for these last major factories, so I'll be making a total of 3,600 rubber per minute. To do this, I'll be shipping the polymer resin from my 2 diluted packaged fuel power plants out to this new factory. I'm going to be using these nodes and building right here. Let me quickly explain what's going on here. So this is going to be using the same diluted packaged fuel setup I've used numerous times. The main difference is this is doubling it. So instead of using 540 crude oil and turning that into 1440 packaged fuel, this is using 1080 crude oil to make 2880 packaged fuel. But a Mark II pipe can only hold 600 meters cubed per minute, and so this is essentially just doing 2 identical 540 setups. I'll be using 48 refineries to do the heavy oil residue, just so I can plug them straight into the refineries doing the diluted packaged fuel to make life easy. With the fuel made, let's talk about how to make it into rubber. So the first step is using the residual rubber recipe and using the polymer resin both from this factory and my 2 other power plants. I'll be bringing those in by train, so I have access to a total of 1440 polymer resin. I'll use 36 refineries to turn that into 720 rubber. The next step is taking that rubber, using 1/3 of the fuel that we made, using the recycled plastic recipe, and turning that into plastic. We'll then turn that plastic back into rubber using the other 2/3 of the fuel with the recycled rubber recipe. But unfortunately, that first step, making the residual rubber, doesn't quite make enough even with the extra polymer resin I'll be bringing in. I'll only be making 720, whereas the next step needs 960. So to make this run at 100%, I'll be splitting off 240 rubber from the final product line and cycling that back into that middle step. Now let me go through the blueprints. A lot of these are going to be either exactly the same or very similar to the last video because the plastic and rubber factories share all the same blueprints, but let me go through them real quick. To start things off, I'll need 24 sets of this dual refinery setup to make the heavy oil residue. I'm going to use 24 sets of this dual packager blueprint to package the water. I'll then combine the heavy oil residue and packaged water in 24 sets of this dual refinery setup to make the diluted packaged fuel. Using the polymer resin from the fuel setup of this factory and the 2 other power plants, I'll be needing 36 total refineries, so 12 sets of this blueprint. I'll then take that rubber and turn it into plastic using 16 sets of this dual refinery setup using the recycled plastic recipe. Using 32 sets of this blueprint for a total of 64 refineries, I'll use the recycled rubber recipe to turn that plastic into rubber. And last but not least, to unpackage all the fuel, I'll be using 48 sets of this blueprint. In total, this factory is going to need 216 refineries, 72 packagers, and 36 water extractors. One of the first things I do when setting up a new factory is pick the location, lay out a whole bunch of foundations, and then I set up my logistics for the trains. One of the questions I had with this one is how the throughput would work with how far the train needed to travel. This is our train station up here. The train route goes through the canyon, through the swamp, down into the blue crater. It'll pick up the first batch of polymer resin. It will then go through the grassy fields, and hey, there it is. Go to the second power plant. I really need to clean up these grates. It'll pick up the second batch of polymer resin and head on back through the desert and back up to here. So this train is literally making about the longest route it possibly can. So with how long the trip is, I needed 2 freight cars to be able to handle the throughput. Thankfully, polymer resin stacks at 200, making it not too bad. I now have 720 polymer resin reliably heading into a sink, being ready to plug into this new system. I've also got my mobile storage drone port set up to be able to bring all of the items I'm going to be needing. So the first step of this factory is making the fuel. And I just love the diluted packaged fuel recipe so much, I just haven't decided to move on to the diluted fuel, cutting out all of the packagers. I'm just a sucker for watching everything move around. So since I'm building basically the same fuel setup as my 18 gigawatt diluted packaged fuel video twice, I'll put a link to that video in the description. I'm going to skip ahead so that we can focus on turning all of this into 3600 rubber. As you can see, now that the fuel is all set up, it's a very similar setup, just quite a bit bigger. So what I went ahead and did is I grabbed a bunch of the different oil. So like I mentioned, I'm using 2 impure nodes right there, and then combine that with 1 normal node for a total of 540. And then same with over there. Even though it's too far to load the actual buildings, 2 of those are impure, 1 of them is normal, all getting combined up. They meet over there, and then 1 splits off and feeds 1/2 of the refineries, making heavy oil residue. The other one keeps going down here to feed the other half. So it's essentially 2 identical setups right next to each other. The next step is placing all of the machines, and then I'll do a little bit more talking my way through belting and piping it up. The first step is placing the 12 copies of this 3 refineries blueprint. I want to line up that pipe with the center of those 2 foundations, because this is where the water extractor is going to go. And I just want to get the refinery right in the middle of my handy pattern that I laid out for myself. With those in place, now I just need to pair up a water extractor with each one. So I want to keep the spacing the same just for aesthetics, so I'm going to come in 2 meters from the edge. And for some reason, this spot just doesn't work. I've already tested this out and I have no idea why, but if I do this, I can get it to place. So where there's a will, there's a way. Perfect. The next step is to place 16 of this blueprint, doing the recycled plastic. I just want to get the pipe lined up on the seam of the foundations, and then again get my refinery centered in the middle of the patterns. Perfect. And then I'm going to separate these by nudging them 4 meters apart. And the last step is to place the 64 refineries doing the recycled rubber. So I'll need 32 of this blueprint. And there we go, there's all 216 refineries placed. Now I just need some packagers. And this one's super simple. I just need to line it up in between the two lines and with the pipeline junction. And that's all 72 packagers and 36 water extractors placed as well. Now, I know this all looks like quite a bit to do, but it's really not too bad. I'm going to start with the real basics, and then we'll kind of work our way up from there. So that's the really easy stuff to do. So next what I want to do is create the load balance systems for all of the fuel. So just like with our other plastic and rubber, the way that it works is this section right here is going to use 1/3 of all of this fuel. And then this entire back row is going to use the other 2/3. So because I'm making 2,880 packaged fuel, if I divide that into 3, 960 isn't going to fit on one belt, but thankfully if I divide that by 2, so 1/3 is going to take 2 480 belts. So all of these refineries are merged into 480 belts. So here is 1/3 using these two, here is 1/3 using the two on either side of the middle, and then 2 more down there. So now I just need to create load balance systems for the 480 lines. So since I know that this is going to use 1/3, this is going to get broken down into 2 480 lines. And then that half will be 2, and then that half will be 2. So let me work on that right now. So once you do this enough times, you kind of learn the pattern, how they're all going to be spaced. So that should be 1 480 belt. And then I just want to mirror that same thing with the mergers on the other side of the packagers. Now we just need the belts. So one of the reasons I just love using this instead over the blenders is it's 60 in, 60 out. So you just get that really smooth Mark 1 belt moving all over the place. So let me go ahead and place all of these down first. So if we have 2 full Mark 1 belts, that means this is going to be Mark 2. So this is our 120 line. Both of those are 120, that means this is going to be 240. And there we go. So that's how that's going to get load balanced. So now all we need is to take our Mark IV. Let's go ahead and just run it right down the middle. So that's 1/3 of the fuel done. Let me copy that to the other 2/3, and then I'll talk about how we're getting all of the empty packagers back into the right locations. And now all my packagers are load balanced into 480 systems. So plug in a 480 belt and out comes a 480 belt of empty canisters. So let's go ahead and figure out where each one's going to plug up. Since I have 4 belts, 2 of them will need to go to the right, 2 of them go to the left. We'll just split it with 2 going down each foundation. This one goes there. This one's gonna come on just the other side of the foundation line. We're gonna run this all the way to the far one. And there we go. That's how all of the packaged fuel gets to all of its refineries. Now I need to figure out how to get those empty canisters back into the same water packagers that are feeding the diluted packaged fuel. So I can close the loop and keep them all as their own little contained systems. So there's the 6 480 lines. Those are actually going to run on top of everything else down here and then back into all these packagers. So I'm going to do that last. So let's work on some of the other load balancing. One of the things is I'm going to remove this. Okay, so I'm going to use my short little lift to bring the resin over when I delete the sink there. So that is just going to be able to plug straight into the machines. But for this one is going to capture all of the resin while it's booting up. So this, we're just going to have feed into there. Wait, could that have just plugged? It could have, huh? And there's the two 720 lines for the polymer resin. So I'll figure out how that's getting fed through this middle part. But let's work on the actual load balancing here. So I'm going to go ahead and place down a whole bunch of temporary foundations. And I'm going to use concrete. That way I can easily use the filter tool later and delete it without deleting everything else. Since each machine is going to be taking 40 polymer resin, I need a Mark II going into those splitters. With each one of these being a 120 line, that's 360, so we're going to need a Mark IV. And that's how the residual rubber part of the factory is going to get load balanced. I just need to plug in each of the 720 lines into each of these first splitters, and it's good to go. The next step is to deal with the output of these refineries. So I went ahead and laid down my temporary foundations. We're going to group all of these together because in total all 36 produce 720, which all fit on one Mark V line. With all the mergers in place, let's run through the belt work. So each machine is going to output 20, so since there's 3 of them in each group, Mark I is still fine. Two Mark I belts equal Mark II. With each of these belts having 120, this one needs to be a 240 belt, so we'll go ahead and use Mark III. And 3 240 lines equals our 720. I can now clean up all my temporary foundations. And that's the belt work done for this part of the factory. That 720 rubber is going to come right over here and start to feed this section of the factory. So let me place down some more temporary foundations. Since each of these refineries will be intaking 30 of that rubber, that 720 is going to get split between 24 machines out of the 32 in this row. So let me go ahead and load balance the first 24 of them. With each machine needing 30, that means I need 60 going into this last splitter. And then Mark II into the next one. This belt needs to hold 240, so Mark III. And from here we can just plug our 720 line right into that. Now I can delete all my temporary foundations. almost forgot. I can go ahead and load balance these last machines. These will be intaking that 240 rubber from the final process. There we go. We'll just need to plug in that 240 line of the rubber into there, but we'll get to that towards the end. And now to load balance the last section, the recycled plastic will be outputting 1,920 plastic. So even if we divide that in half, 960 is more than I can fit on 2 belts. So if we divide that one in half, there's our magic number, so we can deal with another completely full 480 belt. So I'm going to load balance the outputs for all of this into 4 480 belts. And then with these, I'm going to do the opposite and load balance it for the inputs to have 4 480 belts. So I think in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead to having it all belted up and let me run through the whole process. If you think some of these videos should start running longer in the future and you'd like me to go into more of the details, let me know in the comments. And voila. I went ahead and did the belt and some of the electrical work too. So let's run through it. With each of these refineries outputting 60 plastic, that meant I only needed to group 8 together to get a full 480 line. So for every 8, it branches off and we've got a 480 line that then plugs into 16 of these, since these ones only intake 30, so I needed twice as many. And the reason things got belted up the way that they did is this line then feeds this next set, and then these 2 halves feed the 2 halves of this whole section. To complete the whole process, I did have to load balance a little bit differently. So the first 4 groups of 13 refineries all get grouped together for full 780 belts going out. And then this last one, I believe, just has 480. Yeah, it's a Mark IV. But with these 4 right here, these are grouped, and this is our 240 line that we are missing in that middle step. So that just comes around here. And plugs into these 8 refineries over here, completing the whole cycle and getting everything running at 100%. So the nice thing with this design, since it's scaled up so high, I don't need to use smart splitters for anything. With so many of the refineries getting fueled by that first residual rubber phase, I can ensure that the first batches of rubber will fill up the refineries that are needed to cycle everything back without any need for a smart splitter or anything like that. And as you can see, the middle section is all filled in. So we've got the different heights so that nothing is clipping. So these are just the height of a normal lift coming right out of those. With the empty canisters, we just brought them up above everything. Since they had to run all the way back, that was just easiest. So these 4 from back here run through here, and then we get the 2 from this section to all meet up. They then head on into their different loops for the packaged water. And for the polymer resin, we're just having those come down the middle using our short little stubby lift blueprints. So they'll just come down here and then hang a left behind the water extractors, so that they can feed right underneath the belt that needed to go all the way across, and attach a short lift onto this splitter. And to finish the whole process off, we have all of the lines running over here and into awesome sinks. So because I totally missed one, we're missing 1 sink, so I'm going to need to redo this. The other thing that I need to do before we can flip the switch and watch it all come to life, I need to fill it up with plenty of empty canisters. So I'm going to do the same thing I do with most of these. I fill up the water packager side with empty canisters. I then fill up the fuel side on the output. I let them then empty, fill out the entire belt, and then I go through and top them all off so they're at 100. So from one end to the another, there's 200 basically, plus whatever is in the belt in between the two. So hopefully that should be plenty. The one other thing I went ahead and did is, since the pipes are so far coming from there, thankfully they don't have any elevation gain or change to go through, but with the distance being so long and there being so much pipe, I turn them on almost immediately once I set up that whole thing. So these pipes have been completely full for a while. Now there's nothing in any of the machines because they haven't been turned on. And at this point, those have been switched off so that they're on the same power grid. But I did go ahead and pre-fill all of the crude oil pipes so that this can come to life a whole lot quicker and we don't have to sit around and wait for that whole process. But let me go ahead and fix the couple mistakes I've made and load up all of the canisters, and we can flip the switch. Everything is now complete, so I did make one more change besides the other fixes I needed to make. I realized that the empty canisters weren't all going into the correct places, so these two needed to swap directions essentially. So I went ahead and changed that, so now that all of the systems are complete in their own little loops. So now it's time for everybody's favorite, the startup. And now that our buffer is full, which I don't think I ever explained, so let me explain it real quick. This is most likely overkill, but I've played with pipes a lot, and I've found that this tends to be the most reliable way when merging multiple sources, like from the oil extractors. So since I'm joining 3 pipes together, if I put a Mark 1 pump, a fluid buffer, and then another Mark 1 pump, it costs a whole 8 megawatts of power to ensure that I have a consistent flow rate, because every once in a while without the pumps there would be gaps and it just wouldn't be consistent. And so this is my little setup that I tend to use most of the time when I'm joining more than one oil extractor together, and it tends to work. It may be overkill, but sometimes it's just worth it to me. So now that everything's backed up, I can go back over and connect that polymer resin. Back at the factory, I can now delete the sink and plug this in. And there we go. I now have 4 completely full Mark V belts and 1 completely full Mark IV belt for a total of 3,600 rubber per minute. That is mission complete. I went ahead and let the system run for a little bit longer just to get everything up and running at 100% and cleaned up my mess. And if we take a look at the power, it's nice and steady now. Unfortunately, there's not a huge difference between my production and my consumption now. So that is definitely what's going to have to be next on the list. Instead of adding another version of the diluted packaged fuel, I'll be adding a 48 gigawatt turbo fuel power plant right next door. So look forward to that, and thanks for watching.